Alright, here we are. I've been promising for a while to do a tutorial on how exactly to use this Python to text. So I'm going to start with a shout out to SportsRacer48. He's the one that's been putting in most of the work and putting together the Google Colab Notebook that actually does all the prompts. So big shout out to SportsRacer48. To get access, I'm not going to be the one that spills the beans and gives the free link out. So if you want access to Python to Text 5, it costs about $5 a month to get access. So highly recommend it. You won't find a better $5 spent anywhere when it comes to doing this generative art. So I'm going to show you now the actual notebook. Here it is, Python to text image 5 beta, and it's got a really great description of how you're supposed to use it, but I'm just gonna go through and show you it exactly. So if we go to the very beginning here, I've already signed up ahead of time for Google Colab Pro. So you can see here, I'm just doing the $9.99 subscription. This will guarantee that you get the right type of video card that'll actually have enough RAM and work fast enough where you won't be spending months doing this. So very first of all, we're going to mount, and this will be mounting Google Drive so that it saves progress. Okay, I've marked allow. It's going to take a second. Okay, we're mounted. Now we're going to go ahead and get some information about the video card that we've got reserved. So we can see it's a Tesla P100, 16 gigs of RAM. And if you notice here, it's disabling memory support to kind of squeeze out just a little bit extra performance. And in order to get that performance, you have to reboot it. And the way you do that is you just go up to runtime, and we're going to restart the runtime. And if you notice in the top right where it's restarting, it'll let you know when it's done. And we're done. So we don't have to, but if I were to rerun this again, you'll see that the support's already been disabled, no need to restart, so we're good. And then finally, this installs all of the prerequisites and the dependencies and the code and everything. This part probably takes the longest aside from the actual training. So while that's doing this, I'll explain a little bit with these parameters. This first block here is a majority of what you're going to be editing and playing with. The first thing to pay attention to is the difference between these single pipes and a potential double pipe. Double pipe is going to separate a completely different scene, so you might have 40 seconds of one scene and then 40 seconds of the second and the third and the fourth. I'm only going to do one right now, but if, for example, this would be scene 1 and a single pipe would be scene 1, another thing in that scene, and then if you do 2 pipes, now we're talking about scene 2. Hopefully this makes a little more sense after we actually render one. So I'm just going to think of something random off the top of my head here, but we'll say Tibetan monks in the mountains. And then in addition to that, we're going to add some kind of sacred bells ringing. I know that's not a visual, but we're going to see what the prompt makes of it. And then finally I'll add some silk, red silk robes. So that will just be one scene. Now if I wanted to do a second scene that comes directly after this one, I'd add 2 pipes, and then I might say, goat in the woods or something. I'm not gonna do that right now. We're just gonna do a single scene. So our scene right now, Tibetan monks in the mountains, sacred bells ringing, red silk robes. I do tend to leave the scene suffixes here. I might even add something, like if I don't want to get any faces or avoid faces, I might just add some negative weightings of face. Maybe add person to that too. There. Hopefully that'll just avoid getting some obvious faces that pop up. It won't completely eliminate them, but it kind of tells the algorithm that we want to avoid faces and people and maps and watermarks and so on. I tend to leave interpolation steps and steps per scene completely alone. Interpolation steps makes more sense when you're doing multiple scenes. So if I did have a double pipe and I had, Goat in the Woods, this interpolation steps basically tells it between the transfer of this first scene and this second scene how many steps to kind of interpolate the two of them. With 0, it'll be a hard cut. It'll go immediately from this prompt and then it will start generating images for the second prompt without a large transition in between. Since I'm not doing more than one scene right now, I'm just going to leave this off and this doesn't matter as much. The steps per scene also generally decides how long your animation is going to be. This value is actually probably the best to just leave as is. I've tried messing with it, making it longer and shorter, but this seems to be a really great starting value, so I'm not going to mess with this one. And then the prefix, this essentially is a list of words that's going to go in between each one of these different chunks of terms. So it's going to take all of these terms and make variations of this, and then it's going to use all those terms to make variations in the middle and the third. Yes, I'm still here. And you got to be sure to always hit those captchas. You'll be kicked out real quickly. So this probably doesn't make sense to have all of this NASA and astrophotography stuff. The artist reference, this does make a lot of sense. So what I usually do is I'll just go to, say, ArtStation and just kind of find an art style that you like that kind of makes sense. I'm just going to grab one at random here. I really like this just automatically. I'm going to see if the artist has a lot of other examples on here. Not a whole lot, but I guess we'll see. So I'm really just going to copy their name and I'll add ArtStation art by artist name. And then we're going to add a single pipe here. And then I might do Riot Games concept art. And then this has a decidedly kind of a Photoshop painted look. So I'm just going to add a Photoshop painted look. There you go. And then sometimes it helps to add just some kind of crazy random tag here. So I'm going to add a hashtag concept art deviant art. And then I think I want to add let me just make sure where it was. Yeah, so if you notice originally it ends with a single pipe and a space. So I'm going to make sure mine ends with a single pipe and a space. And this just makes sure that it works properly with the different way these scenes work. Okay, and then for the direct image prompt, it does, in my experience, matter a lot if you start with a really nice image with composition and some color contrast. This one is really speaking to me, so I am just going to copy the image link and put it right there. Okay. This right here, limited palette view can. So if you pick VQGAN, that's sort of the more organic, smooth looking ones, although you can only render it at a very small size, and it takes quite a while. I've had very mixed results with it. I'm still experimenting. I tend to really like this limited palette the most. What I'll tend to do is I'll start it right up at 1080p. So we're going to change the resolution from 1920 and 1080. And I'm going to change the pixel size to 1 to kind of get us the best resolution possible. If you leave it to 4, obviously it'll just make it 4 times the size and you can kind of upscale it from there. But this seems to work out the best for me so far. And then finally, I might tweak the palette settings sometimes, these numbers. I might change this between 5 and 9. But honestly, again, these are really great defaults, so I'm going to leave almost all this as is. The only other thing that I'm going to change is a couple of things, actually. So the translation, this is probably the one that makes the most impact. This kind of gives you that feeling of zooming into the artwork, and it gets a lot stronger and stronger as we go, without getting deep and showing you graphs and showing you the math behind it. If we just change this 10T to like 3T, makes it a whole lot more mild, so I'm just going to start with that for now. It looks great if you leave it at 10T, and anything else you want to come up with, but the longer it goes, the closer you get to the very end, it'll start zooming so fast that it's hard to even tell what's happening during the transitions. So again, we'll leave it at 3 for now. We've got this near plane and far plane, so if you're into 3D, you understand the concept of culling. Anything that's too close to the camera won't be displayed, and anything too far away won't be displayed. Really just general settings. I'll usually set the near plane to about 200, leave the far plane at about 10,000, maybe reduce it to like, here I'll do like 8,000. It's hard to tell exactly what this does unless you re-render the exact same thing with these values adjusted, and you can kind of notice the small differences. For this one, I'm just going to call it Tibet. And then finally, the last thing that I believe I tend to change, I must have overlooked it, is the frame rate. It defaults to 15 frames per second, or 12. I'm going to change this to 30, and then in post, I might bump that to 60, or I might keep it at 30. It all depends on what the final end result looks like. So here we go. Everything's all filled out. I've got my text prompts here. We've got the direct image prompt. Everything looks good. So finally, we hit play here. This essentially just generates this JSON string. So now I'm going to copy this by triple clicking, paste it into here, and then this loads that JSON into the script. Now finally, when we go to run it, this is where all the magic happens. And this process now can take anywhere between a few hours to a few days. The good part about doing this all through Google Drive and storing it is that when we eventually get kicked out, or I walk away and I miss a CAPTCHA or anything happens, it'll be able to restore itself on the next run. So if that does happen, I'll restart this and I'll show you exactly how that works. Essentially, you just make sure that this JSON text is copied into there, and then when you click run it, you click restore first, and then it'll pick up from wherever it left off. And another really cool thing about this is that probably within the first 5 generated images, which should be around step 200 or 300 or so, you will start to see the final kind of image taking shape a little bit. So let's see what it comes up with. This is actually after just the first 50 steps. You can see, it started out with just absolute noise, and then it's already starting to take shape. And then as the additional steps complete, more and more color will be added. We'll see some more features, and all through this, it is doing this this translation of Z to make it look like you're kind of flying into the image. And if you also notice too, every time it renders one of these scenes, you kind of get like a score reading. So here's all of the different text prompts we gave it, along with the score that it's giving itself on how well it's doing matching these different text prompts. So like out of all these, for example, it looks like Riot Games concept art is the least of the matches at this exact time, and the highest match is what? The absence of backyard telescope. Since all of these are negative weights, the high score is actually representing the absence of these things. So it's got a 0.95 or 0.94 score of excluding satellite images, for example. Here we go. We can see some more color getting into it. We've got some reds, some blues, and some greens. So this has been rendering for a little over 2.5 hours. It did stop a couple times, and I'm going to show you how to get over that, because it's probably just going to be a fact of running these. They're either going to crash, or you're going to miss one of the captchas, or any other number of reasons will disconnect you. You might just run out of credits and have to wait until you get some more, which is a very unscientific process. But I'm just going to show you where we're at after about 2.5 hours. We're somewhere around 3,900 steps, and here's kind of like the little rankings, and then you can see at the end of each of these we're at 30 frames a second, and we're about 2.5 seconds into an animation. Usually you can expect the full animation per scene from the defaults that we set above to be around 40 seconds total, and you can make that longer or shorter using some post-production effects, but in general you're going to get about a 40-second animation per scene. So it's actually looking really quite good. You can see the like the silk robes effect. That's also doing a fairly good job of keeping faces and people out of this. I mean, you can kind of see these like robed, cloaked figures inside what looks like, you know, like a town out in the mountains or something. It's actually looking really cool. You got some like rocks and like some lanterns and maybe some Japanese sort of dividers. So I like how this is coming out. It's gonna look pretty cool as an animation, but we'll have to see until all the frames are fully rendered. So okay, so I'm gonna show you what happens. Right now we're running, and usually you don't ever want to do this, but let's just say for whatever reason it stops. So I'm gonna force it to stop here. So there we go. The simulation stopped, and oh god, what do I do? You know, maybe I lost my connection to the runtime. So I'm just going to show you here. I'll even like refresh the page here. Alright, so this page is going to be, you know, fresh as if we hadn't even used it before. It's got all the defaults stored back in it. So in order to get back and start where we were at, the very first thing you need to do is always reconnect your Google Drive. Oh boy. Okay, so I'm going to do a factory reset on the runtime. Reconnect. Okay, we are reconnected. And you have to run back through these steps again. So once again, you're gonna have reboot required. So I'm gonna restart the runtime. And then just look up in this top right. Okay, we're restarted. Run through this, install everything else because we did a factory reset, so we are going to have to re-download all this. Now if you just got a temporary disconnect, you might only have to go up to runtime and restart it and not have to, you know, do any of these other steps. But I'm just going to pretend as though, you know, the worst happened and you want to start back from wherever you left off. So we're kind of starting from scratch here. So as this is all going through, obviously this we already filled out before, and since we generated that JSON string, there's no reason for us to have to go back and fill all this out again. All we have to do is just scroll all the way through and find here, which is where we pasted the JSON that was created. And I'm just gonna open up my here we go. Here's my Tibet settings. And then if I just copy this string right here, here's the JSON part of it. You can ignore this bottom part that's separated by a line break. I'm just going to copy this and paste it right into there. And you can see here's the Tibet amongst the mountains. So there's my text prompts. So hit play to load that. And I'm assuming that this is done installing. Nope, it's not yet. Okay. So once this is done installing, then I'll have to hit that play button. Now I'm going to load the settings. And then the important part here is to just check restore. That's it. And as long as it finds a matching scene name, which is defined here, but I believe I named it Tibet. But it's just going to look to see if there's something that matches what was loaded in here. So now when I hit run, hopefully you're going to see it pick up from the exact spot where it left off from. It's not going to have to restart from start or anything. There we go. And we can see it restored from, well, you can see it, but restored from this backup file here, Tibet 79, and we're back at step around 4,000 essentially. And since we're still only 2.5 seconds in, this has probably got at least another 15 to 20 plus hours to get it all the way to the full 40-second animation, and that's ignoring any other crashes or captchas that I miss. So it's a fairly long process. It'll take at least a full day, if not more. If you're really lucky, you can let this run overnight and it will go uninterrupted, but it also might throw a captcha at you 5 minutes after you step away or go to sleep, so it doesn't make any progress over the night. So there's a lot of dancing around to make sure that you don't get kicked out. But anyways, this is where it's at now, 2.5 seconds in. And here's another thing to look out for. Sometimes your render will get into a really weird state. So for example, you can see that it's running maybe because it's it's got the little pending animation graphic here, but at the bottom it says it was completed, and on the top right here it just says busy. It doesn't really give you any other indication of what's going on, and you also might not get any other updates here. I'm trying to see which one this is, but this will just kind of sit and not give an obvious indication that it's still running, but it is in fact still running, and you can confirm that by going to wherever you're storing your images at in Drive and just refresh, and you should see. So for example, frame 90 was just uploaded between that refresh. So even though sometimes it looks like it's not working in here, as long as you see this spinning and it's busy, and most importantly, as long as you can see new frames being uploaded to your drive, then I would just not mess with it. Don't stop and restart it or anything. Just let it run its course. If you see that this has actually stopped, it's no longer spinning, or on the top right here, it says connect or no runtime connected, something like that. It took a little longer than expected. It took about 32 hours or so, but finally we can see that we got this complete message. And when you get complete, that means that there's really no more frames to render out, and the model basically ran its course. So now that we've got all the frames, the easiest thing is you can just go right here and render the video. Although I got kicked out overnight, so I'd have to reconnect to do this. Although I typically don't use this way of getting the video out. What I do is I go into my drive and I find this Python to text input test, and then go to your images out, and here's the Tibet, and oops, and I'm just going to download this entire folder. Download, and it's going to take a little while because there's 1,200 files that it needs to zip. But at the end of this, I will have all of those individual frames as PNG files, and I can bring them into After Effects and have a whole lot more control over how I want them to scale, any frame blending, and any other kind of post-production effects. So once this is done downloading, we'll bring it in After Effects and see what it looks like. After unzipping the files from Google Drive, here are all the different frames as images. You can already see, there was the first one that was rendered, and only after 5 or 6 different frames we kind of arrived at, more or less our final look. And it doesn't change a whole lot, but there are some pretty big changes later on. I'm just going to scroll down to like the very end here. And you can see that, yeah, somewhere around the 1,000 frames or so, I don't know if this is a collapse in the training or if this is because of a very fast Z translation with the camera zooming in really fast that produces these wide blank spaces. In this case it was just black, and you can also see as it tries to catch up a little bit, there's this fluctuation in color. So it starts out as red, turns to orange, turns to purple for just one single frame, back to orange, and then goes into like a more of a yellow hue. And this happens a couple times, especially towards the very end where the overall color of the image will flicker a couple times. It's not that noticeable as an animation, but it's interesting to see in these individual frames. So we're gonna open this up into After Effects and do any kind of final post-production. So the first thing is to just import, and here it is. And when I import it, it'll automatically detect that it's part of a sequence of 1201 images. Then I'm just going to make sure that my interpretation of this is at 30 frames per second, because that's what we rendered it out as. That's correct. And now I'm going to make a composition from this. So I've got this Tibet composition, which is 40 seconds long at 30 frames a second, but it's only 1080p. And if I upload a 1080p, the compression from YouTube is going to eat almost all the details. So one good way around that is to upscale this to 4K. So I'm going to go make a new comp at 4K. I'm going to make it 1 minute long. And now when I bring in this this PNG sequence, I can hold Alt to sort of stretch the frames out a little bit. I'm going to scale it up to 200%. I'm going to change the scaling mode right here to make it a little bit sharper. And then I've got an option for frame blending. The first one just kind of takes an average. The second one's a little bit more intelligent, but it can cause really weird like jumping issues. So I'm just going to render one out using these settings, see what it looks like, and go from there. And I'm going to add my custom song, of course.